take advantage of being able to see them. Okay, get the lights down just a wee bit. Okay, so having gained international renown in Naples as a painter, Jusepe de Ribera famously rejected the possibility of ever returning to his homeland. I judge Spain to be a loving mother to foreigners and a very cruel stepmother to her own sons. This judgment, reportedly uttered by the artist in 1625, was recorded by the Aragonese painter Jusepe Martínez in his Discursos practicables del nobilísimo arte de la pintura, which was written about 50 years after. If Ribera's harsh assessment of the situation in Spain seems at odds with his frequent assertion of Spanish nationality in paintings that are signed español or Hispanus, it is because his relation to the country of his birth is not quite as simple as the aphorism attributed to him suggests. To begin with, Ribera's interlocutor was not a disinterested transcriber of the dialogue. Aphoristic statements abound in the Discursos. This fact alone raises doubts about the reliability of the statements Martinez encloses in quotation marks. It does not diminish the importance of the Discursos as a source, but it does demand closer scrutiny of its aims and its methods. Jusepe Martínez. Now, the intended readers of the Discursos were not professional artists, but amateurs, art lovers, connoisseurs. It was actually dedicated to Don Juan de Austria. Throughout the Discursos, Martinez provides concrete exemplars of the principles he wishes to elucidate, ostensibly drawing on his own long experience and his eyewitness knowledge. Martinez recollects his conversation with Ribera some 50 years after it occurred in order to corroborate his advice on the composition of history paintings. That is, to follow the example of Raphael in the Vatican stanze. And I'm quoting again from Martinez. I asked him if he wanted to return to Rome again to see the originals of the paintings he studied in the past. He replied with a great sigh, "Not only do I wish to see them again, but to study them again. For these works need to be studied and meditated on over and over again. Even though we are now painting differently, anyone who does not take these works as a foundation will end in ruin, above all in history paintings, which are the acme of perfection. The paintings of the immortal Raphael in the Vatican Palace teach us he who studies these works will be a true and consummate history painter. He goes on to say that allegations of boastfulness on Ribera's part are therefore manifestly untrue. I'm not sure about you, but Raphael is not the first artist I think of in connection with Ribera. I suggest that instead of trying to reconcile Ribera's singular admiration for Raphael with visual evidence that points instead to the influence of Caravaggio and Titian and Correggio, we should be mindful of the didactic purpose of Martinez's exemplar. That is, to demonstrate the academic precepts of history painting. The words spoken by Ribera function rhetorically in support of Martinez's argument, and whether or not they are literally true, they aim to convey a profound truth. That is, after all, the function of an aphorism or a maxim. The authority of Ribera's example is also invoked by Martinez to condemn the marginalization of native-born painters in Spain in favor of foreigners. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to read this passage from the Discursos in its entirety. He writes, "Among the various conversational topics, I came to ask him how, seeing himself so acclaimed by all nations, he did not consider returning to Spain, for he could be assured that his works were viewed there with great veneration. And his response to me was, My dear friend, I desire it very much, but through the experience of many well-informed and sincere persons, I find an impediment to that intent, which is to be received in the first year as a great painter, but upon the second year to be ignored, because once a person is present, respect is lost. And this has been confirmed to me by having seen several works by excellent masters of those kingdoms of Spain held in little esteem. And thus I judge that Spain is a merciful mother to foreigners, but a very cruel stepmother to her own sons. I find myself well admired and esteemed in the city and kingdom, and my works compensated to my complete satisfaction. And so I take the well-known adage to be true: quien está bien no se mueva. He who is happy, let him remain where he is. I suggest that this passage has very little biographical value, even though it has often been cited as eyewitness evidence of Ribera's personality, his haughty Spanish character, to be exact. It's one of several instances in the Discursos where Martinez draws attention to the lack of respect for Spanish painters among Spanish patrons, complaining that they are less esteemed than their foreign counterparts. This complaint is totally commonplace in Spanish art treatises, and it's inseparable from arguments concerning the nobility of painting and the dignity of painters, a debate that was long since settled in Italy. Martinez blames the insufficient knowledge of Spanish patrons and demonstrates this by means of anecdotes that feature artist protagonists who either comment on the situation, as Ribera does, or prevail over undiscerning collectors who cannot tell the difference between Spanish and Italian paintings, in spite of their preference for the latter. Similar anecdotes can be found in other Spanish treatises. If you look at the treatises by Guevara and Carducho and Pacheco, you'll find similar stories about painters who trick patrons into thinking that their works were actually made in Italy. I'm not the first person to suggest that Ribera's characterization of Spain as a very cruel stepmother is a rhetorical invention of Jusepe Martínez. I would, however, like to pursue this possibility a bit further and suggest a specific source for it in the work of his Aragonese compatriot, Baltasar Gracian, specifically in The Art of Worldly Wisdom, a collection of maxims that was first published in 1647. So this collection of maxims was published long after Ribera's visit to Naples, but long before the Discursos were published, they weren't even published until around, I think, 1853 they were published, but they were probably written in about 1675. So Maxim 198 in The Art of Worldly Wisdom is titled, "Know How to Transplant Yourself." There are nations where one must cross their borders to make one's value felt, especially in great posts. Their native land is always a stepmother to great talents. Envy flourishes there on its native soil, and they remember one's small beginnings rather than the greatness one has reached. A needle is appreciated that comes from one end of the world to the other, and a piece of painted glass might outvie the diamond in value if it comes from afar. Everything foreign is respected, partly because it comes from afar, partly because it is ready-made and perfect. We have seen persons once the laughingstock of their village, and now the wonder of the whole world. Honored by their fellow countrymen and by the foreigners among whom they dwell, by the latter because they come from afar, by the former because they are seen from afar. The statue on the altar is never revered by him who knew it as a trunk in the garden. Jusepe Martínez was a member of the Zaragoza literary circle of Gracian's friend Vincencio Juan de Lastanosa, and he was undoubtedly well acquainted with the Jesuits' writings. Gracian's influence on Martinez's treatise has been observed, but to my knowledge, a connection between this maxim and the complaint attributed to Ribera has never been suggested. The maxim is about the conditions of fame and the necessity of absence, or even death, especially where certain nations are concerned. Gracian does not explicitly denounce Spain as a bad stepmother, but the implication, I think, is pretty unmistakable. I think Ribera understood very well, apparently from a very early age, that knowing how to transplant oneself was a condition for fame and success as a Spanish painter. Other than the statement attributed to him by Jusepe Martínez, direct evidence of Ribera's relationship to his homeland is scant. We know almost nothing about him prior to his arrival in Italy. Here are the bare facts. He was baptized in Játiva, near Valencia, in 1591. He was the son and the grandson of a shoemaker. We know nothing about his early training as a painter and very little about his earliest years in Italy. He may have been trained in Valencia, possibly in Ribalta's shop, but this is not documented. Similarly, we know nothing about the circumstances under which Giuseppe, along with his brothers Geronimo and Juan, emigrated to Italy. Giuseppe is documented in Parma in 1611 and in Rome from 1612 to 1616, the year he departed for Naples. He remained there until his death in 1652. Ribera left no writings on art, and although some aspects of his life are abundantly documented, especially after 1616 when he goes to Naples, these sources contain disappointingly little information about the theoretical or practical foundations of his art. Contemporaries did comment on his art, however, but as we've seen, these sources need to be interpreted with care. The Italian art historian Gianni Papi has reconstructed Ribera's Roman Urve, the subject of a recent exhibition at the Prado. And this has given him, and he has given him nearly all of those works that were once attributed to the anonymous master of the Judgment of Solomon. Papi suggests that he may have arrived in Italy as early as 1604 or 1605, so he would have been 13 or 14 years old, and he may have joined family members who were already in Italy. Just speculation. Here's another one of these works formerly attributed to the master of the Judgment of Solomon, and actually formerly attributed to Jusepe Martínez, if you can imagine, and now given to Ribera, pre-Parma Ribera. Ribera's activity as a painter is not documented until 1611 in Parma.